Hi, and welcome to another episode of Only Dan's. This time we are greeted by the one and only, what I would like to call the Queen of Privacy, Shannon. Shannon, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I don't think I've ever been called that, but that's nice. I'll take Queen.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Like, I have like who I consider the queens of online safety, and I think it's you, Caitlin Bowden, Lisa Forte, and Nicole Beckwith. To be honest, because I've learned so much from all four of you, so I'm really
hmm
honoured to have you actually on here as one of my guests. Thank you.
No
Um,
problem.
So I guess your moniker "Lockdown Your Life" is
hmm
pretty well known, but for anyone that might not know, would you like to introduce yourself and explain what you do?
Sure. So I go by Lockdown Your Life on most social media platforms. I'm everywhere and nowhere. I see everything and everyone and what you're doing, unfortunately for you, but fortunate for me. And I go by Shannon as my first name. And yeah, so I started my company about 13 years ago, and I've been doing online privacy and cyber harassment and stalking cases for the past 8 years, 8 or 9 years. I was more into like the scamming and scam spotting before that, but I've dealt with romance scams, I've dealt with stalkerware, I've dealt with intimate partner violence cases, a lot of missing persons cases. So I kind of tend to be in those like niches where nobody else wants to be very much. So that's kind of how I got there, and it's been an evolution really with the technology that's come this far, and still there's a way to abuse it, unfortunately. So that's kind of where I end up, is like troubleshooting all of the things and the way we don't anticipate tech abuse, but how it's used to harass and stalk other people. So
Yeah, and it's do you find that the problem is getting better or kind of vastly increasing?
I think it's shifting a little bit, and I think that people understand it, you don't have to be famous to be a victim of harassment or stalking, and that there's a lot of different ways that it presents itself. I tend to believe that if we don't address the deeper societal issues, it will continue to get worse. And it's not about one particular type of individual who does it. It kind of crosses a range. And when it comes to specifically intimate partner violence, it crosses every boundary, every socioeconomic boundary. I've had people who are, very rich and people who are very poor, and it happens to all of them. And so people who outwardly appear to be not experiencing any kind of trauma can bury that very, very deep. We get very good at hiding those things. So if we're speaking specifically about, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, I would say it's on the rise. And in terms of harassment and stalking, I think it depends on what kind of case you're looking at or what kind of harassment can happen to you. And it's sometimes through no fault of your own, you just exist and somebody decides they don't like you. So there's levels, and I would like to say I'm hopeful, but I'm frustrated at the lack of tools and levers available to victims, because the onus always falls on the victim to deal with what happens to them rather than the system working for us. It tends to work against us. So yeah, that's kind of how I ended up in the space in between, when there's no law enforcement option and when doing it yourself is overwhelming. So
Yeah. So I guess it's slightly different in the UK, very recently though, where
mhm,
we have the misogyny is essentially a crime now, and
mhm.
certainly harassment in the levels of men harassing women, that is something that's considered a hate crime, right? And rightly so, in my opinion. Am I right in thinking the US doesn't have such protections?
It's the answer that everyone hates. It depends where you
Right.
are, and you have to define the type of crime. So under the law here, there is no federal standard. Let's say there is state law and then there's local law. So like townships, cities, counties can have slightly different ways in which they apply the laws against harassment and stalking or intimate partner and domestic violence. Now, domestic violence can be considered, in some jurisdictions, it's handled very well. They have detectives or officers that are trained in how to handle cases of domestic abuse, domestic violence, or sexual violence. That's not the case with smaller departments. And again, sometimes these cases are like, well, they're online, so it doesn't really apply to us. But the problem then becomes, where do you file charges if that rises to that level? And who determines that? Is that the police? Is it lack of evidence? Is it lack of trying? Is it, oh, they just haven't gotten bad enough for you to file charges? It really depends on who you have as your district attorney and who you have as the detective on your case. And I hate to say that, but I have dealt with some very good detectives and I have dealt with really bad detectives. So when it comes to those kinds of cases, there's just not systems in place for that, like not to the level that we need them. So it falls to nonprofits or people like myself who kind of help put out resources to the community or bring resources together however we can. And it's just this patchwork of trying to help people get out if that's what they need to do. And then in the terms of harassment and stalking cases, again, it's up to the local jurisdiction how that's applied. So I would say we have a lot of work to do. It's good that we have laws, but a lot could be done to make it better.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think that's very similar case in the UK from my understanding of it from other people is that some police departments or individual officers might be better equipped than others to deal with it, even if it is a law. It's a bit like, I guess,
Right.
with various already illegal elements of domestic violence, right? Where you're actually hurting somebody, but
Right.
maybe some officers may take a different approach to others when actually prosecuting them, even though it's actually a crime that's taken place, right? So yeah, it sounds like you've got loads of work on right now, all very good stuff. So I guess, yeah, you probably have a situation where things are not always cut and dry, right?
Mhm.
Um, how do you approach those when you're dealing? Do you actually deal with law enforcement yourself? Like if they've if you have somebody that's come to you for help, do you try and show them that actually, look, this is actually a case where you should probably actually fight against it?
I think the depending on the survivor or the victim, what they want to do would be
Right.
the answer to that. Because sometimes they just want it to stop and there's no legal avenue for them to make that happen. Sometimes they could file a civil case against their abuser or get a restraining order or a temporary emergency order. Sometimes they have to co parent with the person that has committed the violence against them, their ex husband, ex partner, and they have to co parent because they have children and they have to work out. Custody issues or divorce proceedings or family court issues. And I'm sure in the UK it's similar where you have, couples who have children together and you have to figure out a way to work within the system. Now that sometimes they have like apps for the court that allow you to communicate back and forth and it's very monitored and those are good. That helps minimize the abuse. But a lot of the times if you found with abusers, they will cross every line just to get a reaction. So it really depends on the level of what that person is experiencing and how they're feeling in that moment and their support system and their resources. Because as you know, victims of these types of crimes, oftentimes the woman isn't working, they're a stay-at-home parent. They might not have their own income or access to finances. They may have been isolated by their abuser and financially abused, emotionally abused, physically abused. It could be all of those, one of those. It could be a series of those over time. So as I'm sure you're familiar, it really does depend on their particular situation and how bad it is or how willing they are to leave. And then you go back to that statistic of it takes about an average of 7 times for them to leave. And the most dangerous time is when they are leaving. So their chances of getting unalived go skyrocket when they're about to leave. So prepping all of those things and doing it in a safe way. The main thing is to get them out safely. So if we can do it in a safe manner and law enforcement being involved is something that has to happen to do that, then we do that. If they don't want to be around law enforcement or for some reason they don't want to trust them, which is valid, given my degree of experiences with good and bad in the law enforcement, I'm more inclined to say, do what is best for you. We can always revisit and revise how we approach this, but always do it in a way that's going to be meaningful and supportive and best for the individual.
Yeah, that's a great point. I guess for the individual it's happening to, they need to trust the system, right? If they're feeling uncomfortable with engaging with it, then it's going to be incredibly hard for them to, it's already incredibly hard, I guess in some cases to completely uproot your life, right?
Mhm.
That's what sometimes you're asking people to do. well, not that you're asking, but the situation is asking them to
Right.
do for their own safety, right? It must be absolutely horrific if they can't trust that flow that actually everything is going to be okay. You got to give them that confidence, I guess, right?
I mean, yes, but sometimes it has to come from them, not from me. I can be a cheerleader and I can say, let's save your life, but they have to want it more than I do. And the hardest part for me is the emotional fallout when it doesn't go the way that I hope it goes, or they're not ready, or I have to wait 2 years. Like I've had cases where somebody contacts me 3 or 4 years later, they're ready, and we do, and we handle it. But my favorite kind are years later. I haven't heard from them. I just, when we're done, and I don't expect to hear from you, but I get an email or I get a text message or I get a note from them that just says, I have an apartment, I'm happy, I'm married, I have kids, I'm, settled, I'm in school, I have a new career. Like those to me are the love notes that I live for. And those are the things that make every really bad case worth it. Because at the end of the day, if they're alive and they're healthy and they're getting help that they need and they're healing, that's the best answer for me. That's the best result. And mind you, not all of them end that way, but we hope for that and we prepare for that, and we also prepare for other scenarios. But hopefully the outcome is that we save your life.
Yeah, and that's brilliant. And it must it must take a lot out of you personally, right? Like, how do you cope with your own mental health, right? Because it must be, is there some kind of compartmentalization that
Oh
happens?
yeah. Yeah.
Talk to a
Um,
therapist?
so part of being able to do the work is that you understand trauma work and that you understand trauma response, and that you yourself, the people who do this work, are the ones who probably experienced it. So I don't have to tell you what happened to me for people to understand that I get it and I
Yeah.
understand the cycle. So I for myself, I have to have a therapist, and it depends on the type of therapy that I need at the time. I'm very open about that, even with my clients. I'm like, listen, I couldn't do this if I wasn't in a good place mentally. And I have had more than one time in a year where I've had to just not take any cases and strictly teach classes or do, work with abortion funds or just do things that focus on other areas that I can help, privacy training, digital safety, physical safety training. Like those things take less out of me than individual cases. So I take a lot less cases than I used to protect myself and my own mental health. But yeah, part of it is recognizing the signs of burnout and being really, really mindful not to take on cases that might cause me more harm. So it's about balancing that. And I don't know that there's a right answer here. I can just tell you eventually most people leave the field, and I probably will too at some point, because I will get to a point where I can't do anymore and I'm actually going to harm it more than help it. So that's why I'm kind of shifting more towards like workshops, training, little less hands on for me personally, so that because I take every case becomes personal, even when you don't want it to be. You care about the lives of the people you help, and you care about the people that you're working with, and you build rapport and you build a connection and you build a pseudo friendship of sorts. But yeah, I would say it's like any person who works in mental health services or social work or any type of outreach or nonprofit, you have to find what's right for you in terms of your own mental health. And you have to be super, super careful about that. But I also have hobbies that have nothing to do with this that keep me sound. So
No, it's good. It's good to find. I mean, I guess nowhere near this scale, but growing up, came from a bit of a rough background, and it was, try and find the beauty in the bleak, right? You're trying to try and find good things after you deal with something quite horrific.
yeah, I call them pockets of joy. And
Nice.
that's not a phrase that I created. A lovely woman told that to me, and I was like, yeah. I mean, I'm not a hope peddler. I'm very pragmatic. Some would even call me cynical, but like, I still think the worst thing that they could take from you is your joy. So like, I don't let anybody take that from me. And even when things are really, really, really shitty, I'm still like, you know what? I'm going to go bake a loaf of bread. Or I'm going to do something completely unrelated. I'm going to go for a run. I'm going to go see my horse. I'm going to, pet my cats, take a walk, whatever it is that I need in that moment to kind of like break the cycle or the downward spiral of my thoughts. Because God knows you can go there hard so fast. But yeah, it's really it's a very fine line we walk, and some days I'm good at it, some days I'm not. So I do the best I can. I think that's the same for everybody that does this. So
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Thank you. So I guess one part that you touched on was around the process that some partners in domestic violence take part in, which is isolation, right? They try and
Hmm.
isolate an individual. Would you be able to elaborate on how, like, does it follow a specific pattern or a general pattern, or is it for different things? Generally, as I understand it, it's quite financially based. Like there is some way of taking, that they control the money at some stage, and then maybe friends happen later, or is it the other way around? If I got that wrong?
I mean, yes, and I would say not every abuser does it the same exact way. They all have a pattern of behavior that they follow generally, where they will, accuse the victim of doing the very things that they're doing to them, where it's, violence or yelling or emotional abuse. Like an abuser can not physically harm you. Like they could never put hands on you and completely mind fuck you, because if somebody tells you something for long enough, you start to believe it. So the first stage that they usually start with is making sure you feel as worthless as possible. So they break down the victim, they break down the partner, and they tell them, oh, you're not good enough, you shouldn't raise my children, like you're a horrible mother, you're a horrible wife, you're fat, you're ugly, no one's ever going to love you. And then they'll do the apology tour where they have made you feel so bad about yourself, but then they'll be like, but I really love you and I'm so sorry and I'll never do it again and I'm going to get better. That's the start of it, right? You start that cycle of emotional abuse, and sometimes it gets physical, often it does. And then they have they by this time they've already like said, maybe you should quit your job, like that is usually where it starts, is like when they first get together with this person, they love bomb you, get you into like what you feel is a safe, secure relationship with a man you can trust. And then they start in with I really would rather have you home, I'll provide for you. And they isolate you, get you to quit your job. Maybe it's after you have your first child. Maybe it's after you have your second child, could be anything. Or, you've started your own business and like, oh, that just takes so much time away from us together. They will keep you so busy you don't have time for yourself. They will exhaust you emotionally, mentally, physically, financially. They will wear you down until there is nothing left of you. Basically, they will just like make you feel so small that you can't exist without them and you don't remember who you are. You lose your identity. That's what they want, is that loss of identity, because there's no independence without identity. There's no independence when you don't have finances or a job or a bank account or insurance in your name. They get everything in their name, the house, the insurance, the cars, and they don't give you access to credit cards. They'll give you an allowance, but not let you have your own bank account. So like those are the ways that they can manipulate you. Those are just some of them, and that's just generic and off the top of my head based on cases. But there's a lot of different ways that they can do that. I've even seen a case where the husband took out credit cards, loans, and you know small business loans as well in the name of one of his children, absolutely destroyed their credit before they were 18. Now, this is a US case, so credit is a little bit different in the UK, but they didn't know until the divorce. And she went to looking into the finances to figure out, because she didn't handle the finances, he did. She found out he had bankrupted them. He had taken a loan out on a line of credit onto the house. He had taken out a loan in their daughter's name. He had bought a car. He like hundreds of thousands, and it was just she was left with nothing. There was no child support. There was nothing. So yeah, there's ways that they do it, and it just leaves you shaking your head. It makes you wonder, like, on how delusional do you have to be and how narcissistic do you have to be to believe that doing that to another person is okay.
Yeah, it's I can't really understand how that starts, that kind of train of thought, but I guess that's the point, right? They are narcissists generally. They have psychopathic tendencies at least. But
Sometimes.
but yeah, sometimes, sorry. Yeah, that was probably me exaggerating. um, but they are. I guess this is the thing as well. When we see these people in press reports, their mugshots normally taken. They look like, oh God, yeah. How do you not see that coming? But actually, a lot of the
Mm.
time, they're normal people. They could be absolutely charming. In fact,
They're
they
your
probably
neighbors. They're your friends.
yeah,
They're people your cousins, your brother, your sister, your daughters,
yeah,
grandkids, even. Like it's because there's also like things like elder abuse. So you have like children. with grandparents that they take their money, they sell their house, they take control over their estate before they pass because they have dementia and can't function on their own, and bankrupt the family. So there's a lot of different ways abuse can present itself. It's not always a traditional like partnership. It's sometimes there's friendship abuse, there's cult like abuse. It really, there's so many different ways you can go with this. It's really quite disgusting, but the psyche of the human can do so many things to so many people, and whatever it's based in, it's always power and control. No matter what kind of abuse it is, no matter what kind of dynamic it is always about them being powerful and you being not powerful and having none. So it's always that dynamic they're looking for, is that they want to be the dominant person in the relationship. They want to be the dominant boss. They want to be the dominant friend. And it's always about how they can use that power and control over another person or a group of people.
Thank you. So I guess my next question would be, how can you take steps to maybe recognize this? Is there any way of recognizing this? Or is it that actually sometimes, you have to trust people to a certain extent for any relationship to work? I'm not talking about partners here. I'm talking about, maybe, as you say, intergenerational relationships as well. There is an element of trust there. However, is there a way to tell when that trust is warranted, or should you not trust at all? Or maybe I'm not explaining myself very well. But...
No, I'm trying to think of a way to say it that won't offend people, because in my experience, it's mainly men. I'm not saying that women don't abuse. They do. They absolutely do. And I'm not trying to single out men in this scenario here, but frequently the bulk of the cases of intimate partner violence happen between a man and a woman. It does not mean they don't happen in same-sex partnerships, because I've seen that too. I've seen women abusers, I've seen men, I've seen transgender. They crosses all of those boundaries. Doesn't matter about the money or your wealth or your position. Now, it does tend to happen, be less reported in lower socioeconomic groups. That does not mean that it doesn't happen just as frequently at the higher levels, because they can cover it up. They can pay and afford to pay off people to cover up their crimes. So it really is about understanding the pattern of abuse and understanding that if you've ever been abused in your past, you are generally more likely to become a victim as an adult or a teen. So if you've been molested or abused as a child, your pattern, they can spot you. They know, they can sniff you out. Abusers know, they absolutely know how to find victims. They have it honed to a science. So it doesn't make you less of a person. It doesn't mean you're not healing. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you deserved it. It just means that they know what to look for. They find your weaknesses. They exploit those weaknesses. So I think the number one thing I tell people is, know yourself first, love yourself first, and be very, very careful about who you let into your life, because we think of abusers as somebody way out there, that somebody that might hurt us, assault us, abuse us is somebody we don't know. But the more likely option is that it's a family member, it's a parent, it's a brother or a sister, it's a boyfriend or a girlfriend. It's somebody you know. And maybe they've never done it to you, but you've seen them doing it to somebody else and you felt that wasn't quite right, but I didn't say anything. So sometimes in my experience is that when I meet somebody, I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm kind of ignoring my instincts about it, because I was like, I just give them a chance. Even I get it wrong sometimes. We're never 100% right. But I always tell people to listen to their instincts. Listen to your gut. Listen, if it's saying this just doesn't feel right and you don't know why you don't like that person, just trust that and leave it alone. If you think, even it might just be your own perception and your own experiences, they may never be that way towards you, because abusers are really great at one thing: hiding their true selves. They will pretend to be somebody to their partner and be a totally different person in the workplace. They will be the nicest guy, the coolest guy at work, the nicest boss, and they go home and beat the crap out of their partner or abuse them or isolate them or hurt them and their kids. So it just because you don't see it doesn't mean that you won't see it, because once you've been in those types of relationships, you spot patterns. That's all I do for a living, is human behavior and pattern analysis. And again, I have blind spots too. We all do. Depending on our own cycle of abuse, we have blind spots to that. We don't see it in our own relationships sometimes. And we have weird triggers and boundaries we have, let fall down. And so it's very much being able to forgive yourself for things that happen and not blame yourself for getting into that situation, and understanding there's a lot of things you have to heal before you'll see it the next time. So I know that's a very, very broad answer and a kind of a roundabout way of describing it, but there are patterns to abuse. There's, if you feel like you're being isolated by your partner or your friend, if they start bad mouthing your parents, your family, your friend group, if they say you're irresponsible with money, or they start, denigrating you in any way, and that seems odd to you when they've been so loving before, that's a sign. Like, that's something simple. Like, you're listening for the words of how they speak to you, how they treat you, what their actions are. That tells you a lot about a person. Is how they treat other people, how they treat people in the service industry is very telling. Because traditionally, somebody who is a narcissist or an abuser is often extremely disrespectful to people that they see as beneath them, which may be janitors. It could be they maybe speak disrespectfully to their parents, which, if they don't deserve your respect, then don't give it to them. But like I always say, if you treat somebody poorly who you see as beneath you, that's such a telltale sign of what kind of person you are.
Mm.
100%.
Yeah, great points. I generally have one where when you have somebody that is very likely to nitpick at people, kind of get under their skin. They like that as their humor, but can't take it themselves and get very, like you see in the eyes,
Yeah.
that kind of flares up.
The devil's advocates.
Yes.
The people who have like, I'm just asking questions. No, you're not. That's so fucking disingenuous. No, you're not. You're not just asking questions. You want to dig. Why? What do you need? What kind of reaction are you looking for? When somebody does that to me, I'm like, okay, what kind of reaction would you like me to have? Do you want me to get angry? Do you want me to yell? Do you want me to be very calm? Because what you're doing, not okay.
Yeah.
Passive aggressiveness, that's another one. That's a pattern of abuse. I know we don't think that, but like my one of my parents, passive aggressive, completely and utterly, and I've been trained at it. I'm good at it. I'm really good at it. I try not to do it to people, but like, you want me to get to corporate passive aggressive emails, I can do that. But like things like that, things that you think are quote unquote normal because you grew up with them, doesn't make it normal. You quickly realize, talking to other people and how they relate to their family and friends, you're like, oh wow, my childhood was really fucked up. Like, you're like, oh, that's not normal. Oh, cool. Yeah, very validating as an adult.
Yeah, no, I could imagine. So I guess the next thing, I guess like privacy, right? How do you keep private in such a situation? Like, how do you like? So I think one bit of advice that I know that you repeatedly say is have a burner phone, completely separate. Try and hide that away. Is that something?
It's hard. It's hard. It's very difficult to do, especially if you're constantly monitored, if they have cameras in your house, if they have access to your devices, if you're on the same phone plan, network, whatever. It is very, very difficult to have a burner phone in your home. And I say use it as a kind of last resort, because some people don't financially have the money to do so. And oftentimes, like, the only thing they can do is hide it at a friend's house or like at a public location. I know that sounds crazy, but you do whatever you have to survive, is my thought. And it's like, if you have that phone and it's found in your house and they find out, your partner, that could be even worse for you. That could make them more angry. That could make them more volatile. That could put you more at risk. So I would say, again, it depends. I hate that, but it's true. It depends on if that's the right plan for you. If you have access to it, if you have the ability to get one, if you have support to get one, maybe there's a nonprofit that's helping you get one. I've seen scenarios like that. It is good to have a means of communication, but sometimes the local library is the best you're going to get to be able to communicate more covertly. Like, if you have a plan to take, like, I have a whole secure communications plan that covers every single scenario you could think of under the sun. So it really is, it's going to be dependent on your personal situation and your risk. So you always have to be looking at, in information security, they call it threat modeling. I tend to think of it as, what's your risk profile? What will put you more at risk? What will put you less at risk? How can we do this in a way that is safest for you, that doesn't create any sort of additional change in your pattern of life? The last thing you want is to change your behavior when you're dealing with somebody that's abusing you, because they notice. So it's like, you have to keep up the charade that you are compliant and that you're not listening and that you're not making plans and that you're not stashing money, documents, medication, whatever you're doing to prep to leave. Like, that takes months of planning, usually, unless, it's a super emergent situation, in which case, you leave with what you have. You pack a quick bag, you throw your kids in the car, and we leave, So there's scenarios like that too. So it really, dependent on the type of situation and the case and the individual and what's safest, that's what we do, is we're always looking at that profile for them, the threat model.
And I guess, well, I guess going through any of this, right? Any kind of, even in the build up, right? You're gonna maybe experience adrenaline rushes, fear,
Mm-hmm.
or even how do you coach people to try and control that so that it's not so
I
um
mean, I I teach them coping mechanisms that work for me. What works for you might not work for me, but we do our best to build in fail safes, to build in a support system. When your partner has stripped away all the things that make you feel safe, we have to rebuild those a little bit so that you feel confident enough to do the things necessary to get out. So we have to give you tools and we have to give you methods, whether it's, breathing exercises or, it could be a lot of things. It could be taking a walk every day with your kids. It could be, grooming your dog. I don't know. We find you something that gives you time to think and to kind of stop your brain from spiraling. So it's going to be different for everybody because everyone handles stress differently. And what we're doing is triaging. Like when I first meet somebody, it's usually at their worst moment when bad things have happened to them and they've reached their breaking point. So we triage that. We say, okay, what are we doing? How are you safe right now? What do we need to address today? What can we do tomorrow? What can we put into the next week? What about the next month? So we're looking at things from a holistic perspective. We're not just looking at the immediate needs, but that's the thing we address first, is we put out the fires and then we deal with everything else. And so when I say we do that, it's like I'm just giving them enough sense of control that they don't feel like they're going to sink if they try this, right? So what we're trying to find is, what does that look like for them? What are the tools that would help you get there? What would make you feel most confident? How can we help you get there emotionally? Do you have somebody else you can lean on? The most important thing is that they have somewhere to go that is safe, that they have a resource, that they have if it's a shelter, if it's a family member, if it's a cousin or a sister or a friend. We always find that group of things in their immediate circle that we can work with and reestablish connection with so that they have a place to go, if that makes sense.
no, absolutely, thank you. And I guess so once they are out of that situation, as you said, life goes on, right? There might be some situations where they completely run. um, I would probably imagine that's incredibly hard to keep up. There are other situations where you literally can't because maybe your harasser, they've for some reason they might be your custodian, or other reasons that they use the instruments of the law to keep in contact with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess at this point your interaction is kind of split. Is that right? Is that where you kind of end the case? But do you give them any tools to keep going with that, or do you continue on with them for as long as needed, or
Every case is different.
right?
I that There's a lot of things we do the same. We have the tools that where we're at when I meet them, and then we have the things of, okay, do you need to get a job? Have you worked in the last 10 years? Like, these are things that people don't think about. The aftermath is like, how do we go about rebuilding your life without resources? So the most important thing is to have a network of people who are there ready to take it up when I'm not, because my immediate thing is more crisis management. That's really triage crisis management and then long-term sustainability for them. And it's about addressing the things that they need to live their life: food, shelter, clothing, school for the kids, job for them. They have to be able to function in society, and maybe where they haven't had to before, not in the same way. So it's also getting them mental health services, support, counseling, therapy. So a lot of these things are run through nonprofits that I partner with, or there's resources on the ground in their state or their county. So we have to do a very thorough job of ensuring that we have those things in place to help them. And sometimes I'm not the best answer. Sometimes it's a one-off and I never talk to them again, but it gave them whatever they needed to get out. Okay, that's fine. I'm used to that. That's a very common thing with me. Most of my clients don't end up being long-term, maybe a year at most. Those are usually for the harassment and stalking, not the DV cases. But I don't want to be your plan and your fail safe. It shouldn't be that way. You have to believe in yourself to be able to do this. You have to want to save your life. And whether it's the harassment or stalking, we have to figure out, how can we make you stronger to deal with this? Because these people are just weak, sad little beings who abuse others because it makes them feel better and because they're awful humans. That's it. They're monsters. I mean, they're humans, but they're monsters too sometimes. So you have to be able to be safe, number one, mentally, physically, emotionally, but also you have to have tools. So maybe I'm the right resource, or maybe I can get you to the right resource. I try to do both of those things. And I will always tell somebody up front if I'm not the right fit for them, because it might be a personality conflict, it might be a monetary issue, it might be a safety issue for myself, because I also have to think about my family. So when I give advice or when I give guidance or when I'm walking somebody through a process, I say, this is what has worked for me. Maybe this is not the right answer for you. So if you're thinking about, data privacy after the fact, yeah, we're going to have to establish a whole new, profile for them, social media, whatever. If they're under a protection order, that's a totally different matter. So again, it goes back to what are their immediate needs and then what are their long-term needs. And you have to think both short and long-term when dealing with these things.
Thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, it's a whole, I guess, holistic package based on the individual's needs. Thanks. Wow, this has been pretty overwhelming, but absolutely fascinating, Shannon. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
For taking
I
the
feel
time.
like I didn't give you like a roadmap that you wanted, but like when I talk
No,
about these things, it's fluid. These are fluid cases, and there is no one right way to do things. There's just the best way that you have at the time.
yeah, no, this has been perfect. Thank you. It's actually been very enlightening for me. So thank you so much for your time. What I would say, if there was like 5 things that you could, for anybody to kind of take around online safety or personal safety in these situations, or 5 kind of hints that they might be able to detect if they're in such a situation, is there anything that you could maybe give as general advice?
I mean, everything is general until I know you. So this is not legal advice. I am not a lawyer. I'm not your lawyer. So I'm going to lead with that. This is for educational purposes only. Don't take me as gospel. But I would say know yourself, know where you're at risk online. So Google yourself, look at where things pop up about you and your name. So basically you're like sometimes we call it self-doxing, but I like to think of it as more like know your risk, know what you want to protect and who you're trying to protect it from. So those are the 2 things I think about. So your threat model, your self-search. In the US, we have something called data brokers who sell all of our data. So that can be a thing that we deal with here, but maybe not so much in the UK because you have GDPR in the EU and the UK, privacy laws which protect you from data brokers, but your information can still leak in a data breach. So again, once you know what's out there about yourself, you can mitigate that harm. So data opt out of sites that don't need your information. You can lie on your email. You can lie about your name. You can create a pseudonym. It's okay. No one's going to know about you. So take a look at your social media, see if that is something like that you need to think about. If you want social media, if you don't want social media, everyone has it though. So, you could set it to private. You just kind of have to take an assessment of your overall online presence. I would say trust your instincts. I would say if somebody in your family makes you go, ugh, then you're probably accurate. You're probably like, something about that doesn't feel right. You're right. You are right. Trust that. And then I would say, don't think that everyone in your life is an abuser, because they're not. But there are people that will harm you even if they don't abuse you. So, just be cautious about who you trust and what you trust them with, and reach out for help. Make sure that you have some kind of stability. And I know that sounds kind of trite, but I would say always have your own money for women and men both. And for everybody else who doesn't identify as man or woman, you too. Everyone should have their own money, their own account. You should be able to make your own choices about what you do with that money of your own. And if you're getting into a relationship, get a prenup or a postnup to protect everybody. And I know that sounds awful, but like if for some reason it doesn't work out, because every relationship ends, no matter how it ends, it always ends at some point. You either die, which God forbid you die before your partner, but you either die or it ends. So please protect yourself, your assets, and you. And the best person to do that is you. So that's where I'll leave it. It's like 4 or 5 things. I don't know.
No, amazing. Thank you so much, Shannon. And yeah, thanks everyone for listening. If you like what you heard, please donate to Refuge UK. £15 is what is enough to allow somebody to get enough essentials so they can stay a night away from their abuser. The link will be on just about there, I think, as when we go. Thanks ever so much. Bye.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.